Literature is a form of writing written by humans throughout the ages, which tells us a story in a given particular time. The very definition of literature itself tells us that it's almost impossible to have literature cover every single aspect of human life, which brings to the quote that's going to be discussed today by McCann, that literature can remind us that not all life is already written down. There's still so many more stories to be told. According to my interpretation, what McCann is trying to say here is that writing, through uses such as fiction or nonfiction or biographies, all these forms of literature can remind us that there are many unique stories that are unique to any sort of individual, to any sort of time period, and those can be discovered throughout the ages. And that there will be two aspects that will be covered in this speech. And first is about how literature can uncover little-known details throughout history, and with the use of things such as the historical novels done by Shakespeare, or the book War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. And second is that literature provokes imagination and explores possibilities that have not been given at any sort of other time period. And this can also be shown by examples such as the book 1984 by George Orwell and The Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. So first, I want to talk about the fact that literature can cover little details that people might not know about in the course of those events. For example, in the historical novels written by Shakespeare, which he talks about the legacies of King John and King Henry, no one really knew about what those kings did during their reign. Because in that time period, there were not any sort of media forms such as newspapers or television. The only way people knew what was happening was either by word of mouth or literature. What Shakespeare did and what was unique in that time period was that he was able to document what went on in that historical period, and through literature he was able to tell a unique story of those kings and what they had accomplished. Now, another example of how literature can uncover little details of history is the book War and Peace by Leo Tolstoy. The basic plot of the story talks about the French invasion of Russia by Napoleon in the early 19th century. Now, what he does is that he uses the motifs in the plots of various families in Russia to talk about the greater historical happening of how the French invaded Russia. And through that sort of lens, he covered little-known details about that period of history through the sort of microscopic observations about the various relationships, various families, and various happenings in society. Now, the second area of analysis I want to talk about is that literature provokes imagination, explores possibilities. First is the book 1984 written by George Orwell. When Orwell wrote the book in the 1950s, he used the book in a sort of science fiction as a sort of warning for the American people against the vices of communism. What he tried to do was to explore this sort of possibility in which in the future society was dominated by an oppressive government, and he used literature as a device to provoke fear and imagination in people and warn them against communism. And now second was the Da Vinci Code. The Da Vinci Code, although it was based on a true story, was also spun a lot of imagination among people because it strung together a lot of possibilities that seemingly weren't connected together, but in essence they were. And so Dan Brown uses the Da Vinci Code, or the motif of Leonardo da Vinci, to explore these sort of possibilities and the creative aspects that would have been possible in an otherwise impossible situation. So in conclusion, what literature does is that in a unique time, in a unique society, and with unique individuals, literature is able to connect all of these together to form a story. And we as readers, or as people who love literature or read literature, can read these sort of writings done by other people to understand what the author intended for any sort of details to emerge as a possibility.